Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Direwald.
And I am not Eliana Johnson.
True. Welcome to the Inkstained Wretches podcast, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. And Wretches, El Wretchos, you're in for a treat. You know her, you love her, Christine Rosen. Christine is my colleague here at the American Enterprise Institute. She is one of the co-hosts of the Commentary podcast. She is wonderful in every way. Mother, martial arts enthusiast, funny person, cool chick, all around good human. Christine Rosen, welcome back.
I want to bring you with me on the road. This is a very nice introduction.
But
I appreciate it.
But it's all very true. And Internet, you are listening to Christine as she gets ready to run the gauntlet of a book tour. And I hope that no one takes this the wrong way, but of the indignities that one is subjected to in a public life, a book tour is something special. And Christine's new book is The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World, and it is out next week.
Yes, on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, and everyone should buy 3 copies and sing hosannas to the heavens about them. But the work of a book tour, and when we say book tour, people think that we're going places.
Oh, like it's very glamorous, like staying at nice hotels.
Exactly. That from here you're going to San Antonio and then up the road to Portland and then da-da-da. What a book tour really is doing a lot of interviews in a row.
Yes.
And by this time next week, you will be in the moment, speaking of the disembodied world, you'll be in the moment where you can't remember while you're being interviewed whether the talking point that you're using, you've used with the same person previously in the interview. Am I repeating myself in the interviews or within the interview?
Yes. Well, I'm always just grateful when it's clear the interviewer maybe read the introduction and skimmed the conclusion of the book. I'm like, that's enough for me. Thank you. I appreciate your interest in the book.
See, I have to say, I've done 2 book tours, and I can say that of the possible settings of the interviewer, not having read it at all is great. It's fine because it depends. If they then say, "What's your book about? What is this book?"
Right.
You have a book called and I've certainly done those with morning TV shows in Wolf Snout, wherever. And they say, "So you wrote this book," and they say who you are, and you wrote this book. What's up with that? Basically,
right? Just free reign for you.
Just free reign, and then you spiel. The most difficult ones are the people who read a little
and have an idea about it,
and have a strong idea about it, and are going to argue with you about a book you did not write.
Yes. Well, that's every author's least favorite reviewer too. Like, here's the book I would have written had I written a book rather than just reviewed.
And the person that will say, "You wrote a book attacking technology and saying that we should all live in sheds."
Right.
Without electricity. And you say, "No, I didn't actually write that book. It's a meditation on these issues and how we can be more human in this world. And it's inward facing for people, and it's useful and it's thoughtful." And it's like, no, that's not the book you wrote.
You're a Luddite. We hate you.
We hate you. Or even worse, when they agree with you, or agree with what they think you think.
Yes.
It was Warren Harding who said, "My enemies I can deal with, but it's my damn friends who are I cannot abide."
Yes.
And the people who think that they're helping you, and so you'll get to be the next week is going to be a fun week for you.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am.
What is your strategy roughly when you go into an interview with a person that you don't know and you don't? Because if you're being interviewed by the New York Times, you can look up the writer, you can look up the thing, you can figure out the context, and you can sort of set your shot appropriately. What's your approach when you're talking to somebody from the Wolf Snout Bugle and you don't know them, they don't know you, and you're flying blind?
I usually try to go by the tone of their first question.
Okay.
And they always want to talk about, usually they have a personal story. Like
Okay.
when they'll say, well, when I was in this coffee shop, everybody was talking, looking at their phones or on their laptops, and it was really weird. So you get a sense of their confusion or their agreement with actually an argument that I try to make without saying, be a Luddite, get rid of your phone. So I try to go by their first question. But people will surprise you. I mean, out of nowhere, I was talking to someone off the air, sort of a background discussion, and he's very into QAnon. And so I'm like, I learned a lot about QAnon that day.
Into it? Like favorably?
Follows it. Well, sort of follows it.
He's just asking questions?
He's just asking questions. I'm like, well, it sounds like you spend a lot of time reading a lot of these sites. And, is that really the healthiest thing for you? So people will reveal some of their interesting personal habits related to technology.
And you're very good at this, and it's something that I try to do, which is meet people where they are.
Yes.
And find what's the point of agreement.
Right.
Let's start with what the point, we all like cheeseburgers. Okay, so let's build.
How dare you? I'm a vegan. I'm
exactly.
just kidding. I'm not.
and if the person's a vegan, we all like cows.
Right.
We all like cows. I
There
like
we go.
them. I like them in every stage of their evolution to cheeseburger. But find the point of agreement and build from there and see. My Jessica quotes all the time. Fred Smith from CEI, with the values-based communications.
Yes.
And I interpret that, and she preaches that, and I use it to think about what are the values we share in common,
right? And
how do we go from there?
Right, exactly. Which is not at all how our politics or
No.
media operate, but
No. Oh, talk about a segue.
Thank
Look
you.
at this gal.
I'm here. I'm here to help.
Podhorn should let you talk. This is good. This is good. This is
No
excellent.
comment.
Exactly. That's exactly. If they did the video stream on the commentary podcast, it would just say inaudible under UNA. No, John, we love you very much, and we listen avidly. Okay, so that brings us to our front page. This week, Christine was subjected to the Wretches text thread in which we, for 7 days in a row, fling articles at each other. And Eliana and Nate Moore and Colin, we're all throwing stuff in and doing it. So Christine had to be subjected to this and got to see how the sausage is made. But I think a suitable place to start, as good as any, is on Tuesday, the day that your book comes out, a secondary news story will also occur.
Yes, that evening.
Which is that the presidential nominees of the major parties will debate on ABC News. And the story is, after a back and forth about the rules, it sounds like the existing rules will remain.
Yes.
And Donald Trump's microphone will be muted. Both of their microphones will be muted when not. And the Harris campaign had talked about, well, maybe we should unmute the mics. And it was a weird place for the Trump campaign to have to argue in favor of muting their candidate's microphone.
Yes.
But it's definitely good for Trump to have his microphone muted.
I think so. I mean, I think it was good for the viewers, which we saw a bit with the Biden and Trump debate.
That's a good way to put it.
That we didn't have to listen to the crosstalk.
Yes.
And there's always a lot of crosstalk at debates. Although, interestingly, I went back and was looking at some snippets of Harris and Pence, and they were much more civilized. They were both very calm. I mean, until the fly landed on Pence's hair, which is the only moment I remember from that debate, policy-wise.
That was tough.
But it's very... I think it's useful, but it does show how weird and online and strange this accelerated election cycle is, I think, because they're bickering over things and everyone's trying to understand the motive of the other team. So, if you're on the right, people are saying, well, Kamala just wants to sell that swag that says, I'm speaking, or let me talk, or, all of this sort of girl power stuff, which I find annoying, but it's true. She doesn't want to be interrupted. And Trump wants to use it as some sort of lever for claiming she's afraid to debate him or something. It's all just noise. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out when they're actually across are they going to stand for this one? That was also part of the...
Right. I believe it's
they're
standing.
Gonna stand.
And
okay.
I believe it will be George Stephanopoulos, or as Donald Trump calls him, Slopadopoulos. I believe it will be George.
And no walking and talking. They're not allowed to do the walk and talk.
I think it's standard, and
Okay.
and if I'm getting this wrong, I'm sorry. The stakes. So I was vindicated. Dare I say vindicated? Because people told me that the first Biden-Trump debate did not matter. It wouldn't affect the race, and I said, well, I think it might.
It blew up the race.
And it mattered profoundly.
Yes.
So expectations for this debate are probably too much the other direction, that it will have a massive effect on the race. So for purposes of framing, based on an average of polls and where we are right now, I figured that between 5.5% and 6% of the electorate's still up for grabs. And that's what's available.
Right.
And as every minute, every hour that we get closer to Election Day, that pool will shrink.
Right.
Right? And you have little moments and then you have big moments. And if these are the voters who pay the least attention,
right,
because that's why they're undecided. And a word here, we're going to talk more about this later, but if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not really a persuadable voter because you're listening to a podcast.
You're in the tank for someone already. Yes.
Well, or certainly you know who you're not going to vote for.
Right.
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 It's highly unlikely that there are very many people listening to a news podcast about the news, who are genuinely undecided between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Right.
We got people listening who don't know whether they're going to vote for Trump or write in somebody, but they don't know whether they're going to vote for Harris or write in somebody.
Right.
But I don't think we have very many people out there, and this is true of what I write at the Dispatch, what you write at Commentary, what you write everywhere. It's just to remind people.
Right.
This is a self-selected universe. We live in a small space that where there's lots of wonderful and influential people, but not a bunch of persuadable voters.
Right.
So the debate is huge because of that 5.5% or 6%. They're going to move some inventory next week,
right,
and some people are going to make up their minds based on what filters through. So the stakes are high.
And some of them have also only recently started paying attention
right,
at all. And they're perhaps a little confused, having thought Biden was running. Now it's Harris, and there was a lot of joy coming out of her convention. We are told over and over again, joy, so much joy,
joyful.
But I think for her, the stakes might be slightly higher for her in this one sense, is that she was introducing herself at the convention to a very loving crowd.
Yeah.
Although I still think we should do a prison drama that stars Nancy Pelosi as Cell Block 9 enforcer. Anyway, the look on her
Tasing
face.
Joe Biden.
Exactly. But
back in your cell.
But I think Harris really does have to introduce a different persona than her vice presidential one.
Right.
She's been doing that on the trail a little bit, but she's very scripted and very controlled and does really well with her teleprompter, I think.
Yes.
But off the cuff gets a little wordy, let's say. So we'll see if Trump gets under her skin in that way, because she doesn't always rise to the occasion in those moments when she's asked to explain herself.
Is it harder for a woman?
I think it's harder in the sense that the expectations of not expressing anger or seeming forceful without seeming word that is a stand-in for difficult woman, which I won't say on the air. Yes, there are different expectations. However, there's also some positive tools that men don't have that women can use in those scenarios. And those rarely get talked about. We usually hear, oh, it's so much harder for women. And should she wear a pantsuit or a dress? And oh, the high heels, how high are they? But actually, women can be charming in a way that men can't. And Trump is not a super charming guy when he's in a combative situation. Right. So in that sense, I think if she's disciplined and on message and doesn't go spiraling into her word salads, she could come across as much more charming. And people want someone to like in this election cycle. Yes. They really do.
Another hobby horse of mine is, it is not unreasonable for people of low partisanship and low ideological salience, people who are not ideological, to vote on character.
Right.
It's not unreasonable. People complain about a vibes election. If you're in the 5 to 10% of the electorate that says, I don't really like either party particularly, and I don't have a lot of confidence in either of them, but I am going to vote on who you think on the Straussian on the Straussian matrix of policy and character, right? This is not a Straussian podcast. We have some of my best friends. It would come with
a warning label,
right?
If it
Exactly.
was,
Some of my best friends are Straussians, but this is not explicitly a Straussian podcast. But in the matrix of character and policy,
right?
If you don't care about policy that much or don't put too much of investment in, what are you voting on? Right. Character, and character is revealed. I think for Harris, the expectations are low. Right, the bar is low,
right?
Because she does talk like a Marin County wine mom. She does the unburdened by what has been and all of that stuff. So the expectations are low. For Trump, the expectation is that he will be an orangutan, right? That he will be unbound,
right?
And he beat those expectations in his debate with Biden.
He let Biden
hang himself.
Hang himself, exactly.
And the muted mics helped, but so did Trump, who basically, there was the back and forth about golf that was stupid.
Which actually was the best. That's my favorite
most
moment
entertaining
of the
part, yes.
We should have had the election that night, and we would have had a
very different result. But he talked about, he gave a lot of talking points and mostly delivered. So Trump can beat expectations again if he is not explicitly cruel. And he had his best line with Biden was basically when he said, I don't know what he said, right? He threw his hands up and he said, I don't know what don't know what that was.
Right.
And the audience at home went, we did not either, and neither did Joe Biden. No one in this room knew what Joe Biden was trying to say. So the question is, for me, will Trump get under Harris's skin? But more importantly, will Harris get under Trump's skin?
That's where the female-male dynamic might work against her, in the sense that if she's seen as needling and poking the bear, then she's getting, she's operating at a level that he is comfortable in, and she's really not. One of her weaknesses as a candidate is that she's never actually had to persuade red state voter types ever. She's from California. She's very liberal. She is now pivoting on a lot of her issues for that reason.
She's moving when she announced capital gains tax. Joe Biden's crazy with the capital gains tax. We're bringing that down. We're fracking. We're doing all this stuff.
Suddenly, she's basically a moderate Republican again, or now for the first time. So she's not. Look, she needs to stand out on foreign policy. She needs to take some positions and seem confident in her taking of them. If she starts needling him, that, I think, will read to a lot of people as she lacks confidence in her own views.
Her response and we can just do the CNN interview right now. We go ahead and do that. Her best response in the CNN interview was when Donna Bash tried to get her to go in on Trump questioning her race and ethnicity.
Right.
And she said, "Nope, I'm not. Next question. I'm not. It's the same old playbook. I'm not doing it." And that was really good.
That was smart. Yes.
That was really, really good.
Yeah.
And one of the differences between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton was that Barack Obama had fingertips when it came to taking advantage of being different, right? In a majority white country, he was the first non-white major party nominee.
Right.
He didn't roll around in it like a dog in a dead deer. He did not say, like, yes, we're doing this. He let other people say it.
Right.
Whereas Hillary Clinton was explicit.
It's my turn.
It's my turn. I'm with her.
I'm the head girl.
Right. The 10 million cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling.
Yes.
She was really explicit about it. Harris so far seems to be trying a more Obamian approach, which is let your many admirers in the media take up for your gender and your ethnicity. Don't you do it.
The problem with her, though, where she departs from Obama in a way that I think could harm her, although, again, with such a short time between now and the election, it might not, is when she's asked questions about her former positions, particularly on race. So the reparations thing is a real issue for a lot of voters on both sides of that question. And she was a supporter of that. And she was asked, her campaign was asked, Is this still something that you support? No comment. And so if Trump is smart in that debate, if anything comes up about race, he can say, look, it's America. Anyone should be able to run and win the presidency. However, ask her about reparations.
Right.
Ask her what she thinks about that. And if
Totally.
she doesn't answer, that's going to be a problem. She has to have an answer to some of those issues.
So
I
the
think.
expectations for ABC
Mhm.
are that Donald Trump has been working the refs with the Slopodopoulos from the beginning, right? So Trump has gone into this debate prefiguring, and for his audience prefiguring, that he's going to face cruelly, brutally unfair questioning.
Right.
George Stephanopoulos, very famously in 2008, exploded Hillary Clinton in a Clinton-Obama debate where the Obama campaign was worried about what former Clinton hatchet man George Stephanopoulos was going to do. He and Charlie Gibson just beat the pantsuit off that woman in the two-person debate that they did. How does ABC respond to the various pressures around this debate?
I think he should go nice with the Trump questioning.
Okay.
First of all, because Trump is a known quantity.
Yeah.
There's really nothing surprising he's going to say policy-wise. The question is whether he just brings out his greatest hits and his greatest hits temperament. He's always better in smaller settings than at rallies. At rallies, he kind of goes off the rails. In smaller interviews, he can be disciplined. But if they go easy on Harris is actually the one who's a more unknown quantity for the American people. If they go easy on her, he keeps his mouth shut. It proves what he's been telling his voters already, which is that there's a bias.
The danger, I think, that Harris faces is that Stephanopoulos and ABC, feeling the pressure from Republicans, will overcompensate by dinging Harris. And she has more questions, as you say, she has a lot more questions to answer than Trump does.
Yes.
And okay, well, unpack this, explain this. What about your stance on reparations? What about fracking? You said this, you said that. She's an undiscovered country, and there's a lot of inventory to move through. Whereas with Trump, I mean, the first and most obvious question for Donald Trump is basically, did you lose the last election? Right? Did you actually lose the last election? But it's all stuff that's been rehearsed. Harris is this new space. And I think this is going to be extraordinarily hard for her.
And I think it's why she doesn't want the microphones muted, because that's a time limit on her. And she thinks aloud in a very slow and circular and often incomprehensible way. That will harm her. She'll run out of time. They'll cut her mic, and then he'll respond to her not making a point. I think that's one of the concerns I would think of her campaign.
I think this is going to be much harder for her than it is for Trump, not just because of the word salad component. Because Trump is word salad too, but people are used to his word salad. Hers is new. And because the pressure that ABC will be under.
Yes.
So in between your many media appearances on Tuesday, we look forward to hearing what your take is. Okay. This is old but interesting, which is how I like to think of myself. The controversy over Donald Trump's campaign at Arlington National Cemetery. I had H.R. McMaster on my Sunday show this week, Sunday being the first day of the week. And he was critical of his former boss and the campaign for exploiting, but they've been back and forth. What do you see?
So I think a pox on both their houses, and by that I mean Trump and Harris. Trump, because I agree. I think there are first of all, there's a reason it's sacred ground, and there are rules about how to behave there. Anyone who has a loved one buried there or family in the military understands why those rules are in place. And even if you're invited by the families, those families were also being disrespectful to the graves that were also photographed. And again, people say, "Oh, it's a small thing. They probably didn't mean to." Maybe they didn't. But it matters to those families.
Yeah, we need clear rules around national
I
cemeteries.
would not want my child who died in service to his or her country. I would not want their grave for anybody,
even if I agree.
Exactly. And I know there was all this back and forth. Well, other candidates had done it, other politicians had done it. I understand that, but he did violate the rules, and all he needed to do was say, you know what? If I disrespected anyone's loved one,
so sorry.
I'm sorry, but they can't do that because he's incapable of apologies. On the other hand, the Harris campaign should have just kept their mouth shut. The media was doing her job, was completely covering for her.
Yes.
And what she did, though, being very online, is to write this ridiculous tweet that I think drew negative attention that was well earned by her campaign because Afghanistan is on her watch. She boasted in previous interviews and in discussions about being in the room when the decision was made, and it was a debacle for this administration. American lives lost, lives that Biden forgot about in the previous debate. So it's time, if she's going to put that out there and if she's going to poke the bear, she then has to have a response for the policy that led to the deaths of these Americans.
Exploiting the exploitation is exploitative itself.
There we go. I mean, it's like the snake eating its tail, I know, but that was a real misstep, I think, on part of her campaign. Because she hasn't actually answered many questions, and she hasn't contacted those families or talked to them.
And the story was fading.
Yes, it was.
When she pushed it back up to the front page.
And then, because this is a very online controversy, those families started making videos, and they're heartbreaking videos. And I know some people criticize them for that. I don't criticize Gold Star families one way or the other. Like I said, I think it was insensitive of them not to respect other families by having those pictures taken. But they're allowed to say and do whatever they want on behalf of their service members.
They're allowed to say and do whatever they want. But the lack of decorum, decency, adult conduct, we live in a time, and I bet there's a new book coming out next week that will help address these questions.
You don't say.
But we live in a time where we really struggle with can versus should.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
What can you do?
Yes.
And the law is an insufficient guide.
Right. These are norms violations.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if you don't have the good sense to know that if you're posing for a photograph in a cemetery, your antenna should be all the way up. You should be on the highest alert, whether you're a politician or not a politician. If you're posing for a photograph in a cemetery, you should say, is this okay? Is this okay? It better be really, really, really okay if it's okay. And
Or it should be kept private.
Well, that's what I mean.
Which, of course, no one can do these days.
And that's how it would be
People
okay.
take funeral selfies with open caskets. It's horrifying.
If you were posing for a photo that you were sending to your loved ones, I visited Uncle Joe's grave, and we all miss him, and here it is. Maybe don't be in the picture yourself, but maybe that's okay. But if you're in public life,
you should know.
You should know not to do that. But in the category of my hobby horses, Paul Krugman at the New York Times with a piece, "The Political Rage of Left Behind Regions," in which he writes about West Virginia. And as a West Virginian, I, of course, this was sent to me by multiple people because they knew it would upset me. And he compares the rise of the AFD, a right-wing extremist party. He says, I don't pretend to know what the entirety of the AFD's beliefs, but I'm confident that they're I believe they're a far-right party, and which is problematic given Germany's history.
Yes.
And I get it. I understand why Germans are sensitive to it, and I get it. Then he says, so the places in East Germany, the former East Germany, that have elected the AFD are like West Virginia. And it's a long piece with lots of graphics in which he explores this question, and he has a Marxist take. And the Marxist take is, because these people are voting this way because of the economic problems. And I have complained many times, this could have been my obsession. I have complained many times about Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas?
Yes.
And he concludes thusly, in Germany as in America, then, voters in left-behind regions are understandably angry, and they channel this anger into support for politicians who will make their plight worse. Why won't these dumb hillbillies
vote the way that's best for them?
Vote in their own self-interest.
Yeah.
They're being tricked into voting against their interest. Well, let me tell you, West Virginia, didn't do better under Barack Obama than it did under Donald Trump. It didn't do better under George W. Bush than it did under Bill Clinton. It didn't do better under Jimmy Carter than it did under Ronald Reagan. The idea that there is a salvific quality in these parties for these places is infuriating to me. What affected West Virginia? The end of coal's dominance as the overwhelming majority of America's electric power generation. So for a number of decades, America was using more electricity every year and therefore needed more coal every year to meet these loads. And the two factors that came in, first, mechanization. The coal mining jobs in West Virginia did not go to China.
They disappeared.
Weird. They were mechanized.
The human jobs did. Yeah.
They were mechanized. And this was partly because of what labor unions were able to achieve, the Pyrrhic victory of winning better and better and better conditions and higher pay, which created the incentive for expensive equipment to do hard and dangerous work. So you go through mechanization, and then you go through the shift away from coal into other things. That's what did it. And neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris is going to do anything about making it 1955 again in West Virginia.
But it's interesting to me, and I'm sure this is not the first or last time that Krugman will be called a hypocrite. But on the left, everything about the message for the Harris campaign is policy doesn't matter, it's vibes.
Right.
And that it's working for her, but that's the opposite of what he's saying.
Exactly.
If they're voting on vibes and that just means they're ignorant, then what does that mean about Democratic voters who want to vote on vibes for Harris? So it's very shocking. I worked as an au pair, actually, right after college, before grad school in Berlin. And the family I worked with lived in West Berlin, but they had a lot of family in former East Berlin. The wall had just come down a few years earlier. And it was interesting to see that the cultural differences were still vast. They still, Germany took on a real challenge in reintegrating East Germany. And I had, as an American, I thought, oh, well, it's great. They all get along now. And it was kind of a young, naive, about to be a grad student. But it was the family I worked for. The husband was involved in local politics, and he said, "Oh, you don't understand. This will take my grandchildren will still be tackling these problems because we don't feel unified, and they don't feel like we have their best interests in mind, and vice versa." And it wasn't just a matter of the economics.
That's right.
It was a matter of do we connect as a people? Do we see ourselves as in this together? And the divisiveness of and the condescension of the Krugmans of the world telling people from West Virginia, you ought to vote this way, it's in your best interest, is just astonishing after all these years. Have they learned nothing?
And that social and cultural issues are illegitimate grounds for how you're going to vote.
Exactly.
The people who are going to vote for Kamala Harris who disagree with her on policy, Liz Cheney is going to vote for Kamala Harris, despite the fact that on 80% of things, they would disagree on foreign policy and domestic policy.
Yes.
She's going to vote for her because she thinks that's more important than the policies, that stopping Donald Trump is more important.
Trump turned a lot of conservatives into one-issue voters in the way
That's
that
right.
abortion used to be a one-issue voting thing for people.
Exactly. That's not illegitimate. Right? Agree or disagree with it. It's not illegitimate. Neither is it illegitimate for somebody in West Virginia to say, I know that I might get more government benefits from a Democratic administration and a Democratic Congress, but I care about abortion and I care about the following issues. I care about trans sports. Whatever your issue set is, social and cultural issues are issues too. And this sort of sneering, talking down to the benighted, as I like to say, hillbillies in the mist. Oh, if only they're almost human. They're so close. They're these homunculi are so close they almost seem human, and I hate it. Okay, one of the recurring themes of this podcast is captured media. and helping people remember the difference between being a journalist and being a partisan, even as an opinion journalist, right? And many people have gotten lost in that sauce from time to time. I want to lift up one who was not lost in the sauce, Charles C.W. Cook at the National Review, who wrote a broadside against the critics of National Review, who were tutting NR for reporting on, so I'll just read the lead. Some of the louder voices within the online right are angry with our own Nathan Ehrenreich, sorry if I got that wrong, for having noticed that Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, is spending her time releasing music videos instead of focusing on her role as co-chair of the Republican National Committee. On Twitter today, Dan Bongino complains that Nathan's assessment will somehow have deleterious effects on the GOP's chances in November. The end of this year, Bongino writes, will bring with it the most critical election of our lifetime. And yet, instead of taking his cues from, quote, the real warriors who are trying to save the country, Nathan has the temerity to criticize the RNC in public. By this infraction, Bongino concludes, Nathan has confirmed his membership within the, quote, useful idiocy class.
This is the same group that, by the way, likes to talk about the regime media and the regime this and the regime that, and now they're scolding someone publicly for not behaving like regime media on their side of the aisle. It's ridiculous.
And not understanding the difference between, and this is something commentary does, this is something that Dispatch does, this is something that places who are writing opinion and providing opinion are not useful if they only tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
If you only want pieces, if all National Review did was crank out pieces that said another glorious day for the Republican National Committee,
comrades, unite.
Exactly. The sugar beet harvest is on track to be the greatest ever. Then what's the point?
Right.
Right. How is that?
But that has become, I'll say, as someone who's done some opinion journalism off and on for 20 years, that trend has accelerated on the right since Trump, because there was this, first of all, the way he attacked the media, obviously, and he was correct in some of his criticisms about the media's bias. And if you're a conservative, you've long understood this. But the response should never be, let's become more like the enemy.
Exactly.
Let's do what they do better. That's a better tactic. No, actually, you're supposed to be better.
Right.
You're supposed to actually criticize your side when it makes a misstep. And when their politicians keep losing elections because they're making poor candidate choices, all of the Trump era, I think it's completely legitimate to say, you know what, we're supposed to be a political party's purpose is to win. So if you're losing and losing and losing, it's worthwhile to ask why. And if a Nepo baby daughter of the current presidential candidate who wants to, become a YouTube star, I mean, great for her, but maybe find someone else who can do the job of co-chairing the RNC.
Right. And when these organizations outsourced, and the Democrats suffered badly after 2016 from capture by the very online and very media.
Right. That's right.
And that's how we end up with Black Lives Matter taking over the reins on public safety policy and the Green New Deal. A lot of stuff happened because the party, which has a job, which is to win elections, and the media has a job, which is to
hold the powerful accountable for their behavior.
Well, that's the third. So the media has a job, which is to make money for its owners and investors.
Oh, you're so cynical, Chris.
And then you and I have a job as journalists, and that's the thing. That's the part. Right. And if the journalist is not independent, then what is the point of the journalism? Morning Joe has a question about that. Mediaite headline: Morning Joe crew accuses media of pro-Trump bias. They're so concerned with being objective that they give Trump an advantage. And this is a perfect distillation of the same. In this way, Dan Bongino and Mike Barnacle are reading out of exactly the same hymnal, singing out of the same hymnal, which is, don't say things that are mean or bad to our side.
You remember, though, Morning Joe didn't get to go on air the day after the Trump assassination attempt.
Well, they were very cross about that.
So worried that someone would say something so outrageous that the show would be canceled.
Well, they let people know that they were very cross. They were very cross about it, and they would not let that happen again. Here's the lead from Mediaite. Morning Joe host slammed the mainstream media for its ongoing. What do you think you are? You think you're the niche media?
Because they have MS in front of the NBC.
Oh, that's right. Morning Joe host slammed the mainstream media for its ongoing coverage of former President Donald Trump, accusing outlets of being, quote, so concerned with being objective that reporters were giving the Republican nominee an advantage. The barrage of criticism came as the team covered Jim McCain, son of the late Senator John McCain, who blasted Trump for cutting a campaign ad in Arlington National Cemetery. The segment unraveled as co-host Mike Barnicle lashed out at Trump as a delusional old man whose deranged antics and remarks were being reported with, quote, false equivalency by mainstream media journalists, he said. And here's the thing. Joe Scarborough agreed, weighing in to blast the media for being, quote, so numbed by, quote, hate speech that it was failing in its duty to, quote, cover Donald Trump. He added that the media's, quote, concern with, quote, objectivity, which he said was, quote, actually not objectivity at all, meant it was engaging in moral relativism. Give me a break.
Yes.
And if a Republican is hearing this, they're saying, how could they say that? The media is so biased against Trump. There is truth in what they're saying. It's something we just talked about with Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. People are inured to Donald Trump's antics, right?
Antics, which, by the way, Morning Joe Scarborough in particular in 2015 and 2016 loved and had
begged for,
devoted lots of airtime to.
More interviews. Can we get Trump back on? Can we get Trump back on? Remember when they went to his New Year's Eve party?
That's right.
And were skulking around the back stair, trying to get one more morsel to the golden microphone of Donald Trump. And oh yes.
Oh boy. See, I memory hold these things for a reason. But yes,
did he
true.
officiate their wedding?
No, but they joked about it, and it was
a running gag.
Right.
But it sounded like it was.
People are saying you'd be the most married. You'd be the most married.
Be the best wedding ever.
Best wedding ever. The idea that the most important election in American history is always the next election because we get to have another one. If you didn't like this one, we'll have one more we'll have another one in 2 years. Mm-hmm. You can vote again in 2 years, and then 2 years after that, we'll have another presidential election. That's the point. And if you steal what Dan Bongino and Mike Barnicle are both doing, is saying the stakes are simply too high for us to do our jobs. We cannot do our jobs. We cannot be fair. We cannot be independent. We cannot try to be fair and impartial because the stakes are simply too high. So we're just going to have to go in the tank.
Do they not? I mean, just from a free market perspective, don't they see that is inefficient as a long-term strategy? They remind me of the cultists who are always, put on your white sneakers, lie down on your bed in your all-white tunic, and tomorrow you'll be delivered to the asteroid, and then it doesn't happen, and the next day they have to explain why it didn't happen.
Right, the Campbellites.
Keep them all. But, there is a sort of cult-like sensibility of, it's so terrible, and they do they make money off of the sort of apocalyptic approach, but it's unsustainable, and people actually tune it out. And in a sense, it's been useful for Trump to tone down his apocalyptic tone because people had kind of written it off. They didn't pay attention to it anymore. So it's interesting when it emerges. Occasionally, you see it kind of burble out of him at a rally, and he can't help himself.
Right. How bad are things in America today?
Right.
And I listened to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In an interview recently talk about America is a third world country and da-da-da-da-da. And you think, if you live in that world and I think the answer from a market competition standpoint, this is narrowcasting versus broadcasting.
Right.
You don't need that many people. I don't know how many people watch Morning Joe, but let's say it's 1 million people. If 1 million people watch Morning Joe, if they watch every day for the end of the world, Roger Ailes famously, I don't know whether famously or not famously, said, the problem, and this is the Glenn Beck problem, the problem with predicting the end of the world is sooner or later you have to deliver. right?
That's right.
So if every day you say it's all over now, this is it, this is it.
So I have to start crying on air.
You have to start crying on air. And if
next time I'm on the show, I want to see some tears.
some real tears. If Valerie Jarrett is allowed to, then that's it. Then it's all over. And then you come back the next day and say, yeah, things are actually pretty much about the same as they were before. And elections are important, but they're not the only thing. So, but what do you do when you're feeling blue? What do you do when you're down? Well, you could talk to the Joy Czar. Bloomberg reports that National Public Radio confronts election season with a, quote, Joy Czar. Hello, welcome back. Oh, so this is a transcript, so I want to get it right.
Can I say my favorite phrase?
Yeah.
The newsroom throughout this person, the Joy Czar, will, quote, ratchet up our joy quotient across platforms, which sounds like something that, is from a parody of a TED Talk by a business owner who wants to, inflict mandatory joy on their audience.
Amid the highly charged partisan politics in the U.S., along with wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, National Public Radio has appointed a, quote, Joy Czar to help the broadcaster find more uplifting stories. Embedded in the newsroom throughout the year, the person will aim to, quote, ratchet up our joy. Ratcheting it up, yes.
Mandatory joy.
Now. This is your time in Berlin would help you. Would help you.
Exactly.
This is where I have the fun. Now you are doing it. This is a celebration. Quotient across platforms, according to an internal memo. The newsroom itself might need some joy. This is true. Yes. I'm going to give NPR the benefit of the doubt here and say that this is tongue in cheek. A little bit. A little bit. And that what they're doing is they are looking for good news stories.
Right.
And the use of the word czar, I'm guessing, is a nod to the controversy around whether Kamala Harris was a czar, not a czar, who's a czar, and that this is. I'm going to give them, and we'll check back. We'll check back on this, but I'm gonna give them the opportunity to be right, and that this is a fun thing.
Oh, you're much nicer than I am.
I
I feel like this is even if it is tongue in cheek, it's tongue in cheek in a way that doubles down on the already I think somewhat accurate portrayal of them as being completely in the pocket of one political party versus the other, and but what they really have become, I see it more as a problem of they become sort of a radio version of doom scrolling, right? It's very negative. Lots of negative news.
So they need somebody to bring good news.
Forced joy. But it reminds me, remember that site Upworthy, which is like, we will force feed you puppies and kittens and rainbows and everyone will be happy on the internet. It doesn't last. People actually like to be angry and anxious and raging about their politics in particular. So it'll be interesting to see if the mandatory joys are, what are the requirements for this job? Like, do they have to perform cartwheels? Like, how do you force people to be happy?
I think what you do is you find good news stories. And then the question is, when you are covering the good news story, and NPR has this problem of when it has a good story, it has to make it NPR-y. It has to be, despite having...
I'm Sylvia Padori.
Right. Despite having faced... discrimination and oppression,
right.
As a trans man, Joe Matadots won the Scrabble championship for Utah, and you're like, okay, well, but this is supposed to be so in the news business we call them brights, and a bright is the Wall Street Journal used to do the best brights. Yes. On their front page, usually animal stories.
Yes.
Just a little thing that is, it's notional, right? It's just a little, that's all it's supposed to be.
Chipmunks are cute.
Chipmunks are cute. Here's a story about a dog that found its way home after 6 months or whatever. NPR struggles to do the brights because they're so sodden with purpose and meaning.
Yeah, they're very self-serious.
Yes, that when you say, but how has climate change affected the number of lost dogs? How is it that discrimination has afflicted this family? And the inability to decouple things and just have it be bright and light.
But that's I have to say that's recent. I used to listen to Morning Edition. I used to listen to a lot of NPR. And I'll set aside, the criticism is on my part is more about the news side because they have lots of quirky, great shows that I love. But
Wait, don't tell me, etc.
Yes, exactly. Yes. But it did strike me that they did become much more, in a way, weirdly online doom scrolling tone. And people noticed, and people, including people on the right side of the aisle who would, maybe confess quietly, I don't have the tote bag, but I still listen to NPR.
Yeah, it used to be one of the best
Yes.
and most fair.
Yes, and they fell away. Those viewers fell away not because of the political content, but because of the tone. So I think it's proper to tone police. They're tone policing themselves
and
now.
the same Bongino-Barnacle syndrome, which is, how could we really talk about this at a time like that when the stakes are so high, and
especially about race?
Yes.
And during COVID, they were
It's and the advantage of being not having to face the same market forces as other places is that you can talk about what matters. But if you have internal capture, where people, so you have audience capture for the places like Bongino and Barnacle work, but you have in-house capture at a place like NPR, where people become unable to serve the audience because they're serving the feelings of the people with whom they're working.
Yes.
But I'm open to.
I know. I've squashed your optimism. I like your
how much
optimism about joy.
Okay. How much would somebody have to pay you a month to write favorable pieces that were approved and favorable to the Kremlin? What's your number?
They couldn't afford me.
They couldn't afford me, right?
I have expensive taste.
So there's been a lot of coverage of this story. Here's New York Times headline: U.S. announces plan to counter Russian influence ahead of 2024 election. And embedded in that is the tease of a bunch of indictments that the FBI director and the attorney general announced this week about Russian state actors who were laundering money to fund YouTubers and media personalities in the United States. And it seems, and so the outfit, and Colin may have to help us on this one a little bit, but the part that stuck out to me was, so Commentator One, they don't identify who these right-wingers on media are. Commentator One's contract.
It's like a game of Clue for the rest of us.
Exactly. Commentator One's contract, which was between Commentator One's production company and U.S. Company One, provided for 4 weekly videos to be hosted by Commentator One and live streamed by U.S. Company One in exchange for a monthly fee of $400,000. Plus a $100,000 signing bonus and an additional performance bonus. Commentator One's production company agreed that any and all content created under this agreement shall be the property of U.S. Company One. So U.S. Company One seems to be Tenet Media.
Which I'd never heard of until I
Is this
read
right? We're working hard not to libel anybody as we go here. We want you to know we're making a good faith effort here. And this is a woman named Chen.
Joy. What's her first name? Lauren. Yes, Lauren Chen.
Okay.
Who has an affiliation with
The Blaze
and Turning Point USA.
And Turning Point USA.
Okay.
So this is a constellation of people from that world.
From that world, yes.
Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, and Tim
Pool. Right.
So these folks say that they did not know that the money that they were getting paid was Russian money being laundered. And the people who are being prosecuted here seem to be, and it's through RT, I believe, which is Russia Today, which is the now, it's the only interview I've ever walked out of in my life. Before Russia Today, we knew that Russia Today was Russia Today.
Yeah.
This is in the early Putinist era. And they were asking me questions about the U.S. election. I was working at the Washington Examiner doing every hit that I could. And it got so bonkers, I just unclipped my microphone.
Goodbye.
And I was like, nope, not here.
You hovered into the hedge.
Yeah, exactly. We'll not finish this one. And that was 2007.
Yeah.
So that was.
They are a known quantity for a long time now.
They're a known quantity. So it seems to be that this money, they created shell company or whatever to push this money through. And the question, of course, is, were they funding content that they would have liked anyway because it would have been anti-Ukraine, would have been pro-Trumpy, culture war, endless culture war. Let us replace the endless war in the field with an endless culture war at home.
Right.
Were they paying for content that they were going to like anyway, or were these people creating content to satisfy the demands?
Right. Well, it's. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but the Russians really like the Republican Party operatives, and the Chinese really like the Democratic Party operatives, and so we're having a weird proxy Cold War, largely fought on TikTok and X. So it's a very strange thing, but I think we're going to see more cases like this where people who have large online followings or the kind of sort of slightly off to the left or off to the right of center, shows that garner a lot of audience, really probably should be doing due diligence and sit down with someone who knows what a CFO is and make sure their businesses are legit. Because at least when it comes to registering as a foreign agent or any of the rules and regulations we have about that, you have to do your due diligence as a journalist. If someone said, I'd love for you to write an op-ed, actually, I'll tell you, I've had weird companies approach me, car companies who were like, you should write about how it's individual choice to put your cell phone down. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. They will approach writers for this sort of thing.
I've had to tell people oftentimes over the years, well, now I can't do that because you've asked me to.
No, and
it's funny. That's
exactly
a story that
right.
I might have gotten to eventually.
Right.
But because you've asked me to, now I can't.
Right.
I can't.
And that's on the journalist for not, you should never, you look the gift horse in the mouth and make sure it's not Russia behind it.
Or anybody, right? I can't even take money from my friends. I can't, I've been offered so many trips and so much stuff over time, and you just can't take it. You cannot do it, even if you agree with the person.
Right.
But I'm extremist on this. I'm now to the point I won't vote. I'm pretty far gone on these things.
You should be our ethics czar for journalism.
Yes, we need a joy and ethics. Joy and ethics.
The joy of ethics.
That's right, joyful ethics. But I think that I'm willing to believe the people here who are not being prosecuted who say they didn't know.
Right. Doesn't make them look good though.
They should have known.
Yeah, that's what
they should have
agree.
known.
I agree.
If somebody comes up to me with a bag of money and says, man, we love your posts. They're so great. We love your videos. Here's a $100,000 signing bonus. We're going to pay you, what was it, $400,000 a month?
$400,000.
For my stuff, for my twaddle. I'm going to say, I wonder. And look, the motivated reasoning of saying, well, maybe it's happening and maybe they have some billionaire investor. Maybe it's Elon Musk. I don't know. But I would just say, if it's too good to be true, it probably is, number one. And number two, if you're getting your news and information or infotainment from these narrow and deep outlets, right? If you're loving, one of the interesting things about Joe Rogan to me, his audience is actually kind of weirdly, I'm
all
sure,
over the map politically.
Yeah, I'm sure it's overwhelmingly male.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's 70 or 80% male, but it's kind of eclectic in its own way, right? There's viewpoint diversity. There's a through line from Joe Rogan, but there's viewpoint diversity. People on the left, whatever. Fine. If you are getting a lot of your content from a narrow stack, look out.
Yeah.
Because whether those people are being paid through a Russian shell company or not, you are putting yourself in the airless crypt that Mike Barnacle and Dan Bongino want you to live in. Yeah. It's not good for you, and you have to force yourself to get out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
Harump. Okay. Brian Stelter back at CNN. So in the long odyssey of Chris Licht at CNN and the effort to move CNN to the middle, Brian Stelter was an early casualty in his reliable sources newsletter. And then last week we reported, or 2 weeks ago, we reported that Oliver Darcy had left CNN and was starting his own Substack. Now this week news that Brian Stelter is back, baby. He's back at CNN.
New and improved.
New and improved. And you once wrote a piece about Brian Stelter.
I did.
And I think we may have even talked about it on this podcast when it came out in October 22. Helter Stelter. What did you write?
Well, I was not a Stelter fan,
Mm-hmm.
and when the shakeup under Licht at CNN happened and he was let go, he did play the role of the martyr very well. He
Very
really, oh, I'm a martyr. But the truth is, his show didn't get good ratings. He had become quite partisan in what he decided to cover, and that would be fine if he was just a regular opinion guy on CNN.
Yeah.
But his whole role was supposed to be, I'm the fact checker. I'm the one making sure everybody's doing their job appropriately. He promoted people like Michael Avenatti.
Right.
I mean, he fell for a lot of the mainstream media anti-Trump stuff because it felt good and it rewarded him at the time. But it didn't reward him enough because enough people started tuning out of his show that it wasn't something that they decided to keep. I mean, look, I think he went off to a farm and he's a whole new man and he's claiming it's going to be all new, and it'll be interesting to see. I bet he comes out with a couple of mildly critical newsletters about the Harris campaign and then goes right back to what he knows and does well. So I feel like he always was someone who had a very high self-regard for his important role as a moral arbiter in journalism. And maybe he did that sometimes, but he kind of lost his way and he lost his ratings. So from a business side, if I were Chris Licht, yeah, that's an easy
I think
call.
a media criticism podcast for a niche audience like Extinction Wretches is a
brilliant idea.
It's fine.
It's totally fine.
We are not mainstream in the way that it's niche, right? It's if you're listening to this, you want to know about this.
You're a special person if you're listening to this.
You're a very special person.
We value you.
We value you. You matter. But putting media criticism as a television show, I don't know. And putting media criticism on CNN, just as Fox has one too,
right,
is double because you can't do it right. There's no way to do it correctly. And you could have, when he had a TV show at CNN, he could have done half of every show, just like Fox has Howard Kurtz.
Right.
They could do half of every show. What journalistic travesties were committed on air this week?
Well, that's what he did do. He had half of his show was just clips from Fox News at the
end.
But
that's the thing.
That was the job.
He was doing Fox, not CNN.
Right.
And at CNN, if you want to do media criticism, you better criticize your own team.
Yes.
And
fiery but mostly peaceful chyrons, for example, during riots. I'm just saying.
And the way that those shows worked was they would, when an issue would rise to a high enough level, you'd get a to be sure. To be sure, there's been controversy, and maybe you'd even have an executive. I asked the executive a question about the mostly peaceful but fiery, and they said it was cool, and we're going to hold them to account. Come on, right? You're on their platform. It's you. I have a core belief that media criticism is the first refuge of the scoundrel when it comes to politics. You don't want to talk about your party.
Yeah.
Talk about the other bad media, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to talk about this election. You don't want to talk about this race. If you're Mike Barnicle, you know who to attack.
Right.
If you're Dan Bongino, you know who to attack. You don't talk about the race. You talk about the media as a disembodied entity.
Right.
That
a
is,
blob.
Yeah, this blob that's out there that's doing bad things to you. And one of the great frustrations of our era, and the left does it, the amount of media criticism or the amount of partisan hackery dressed up as media criticism is a lot. So welcome back, Brian Stelter.
We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see what happens. Maybe that life on the farm was good. And that brings us to our Facile Files. That means we're in the home stretch. Okay. The Facile Files, I don't know, and you strike me as a person who maybe is much more rugged and wholesome than me.
I'll take it.
But the New York Times, I swore off air conditioning, and you can too.
Yeah, so wait, I grew up in Florida.
Yeah, so I don't know where you fall on this.
This is pure propaganda,
Okay.
and they should have issued a full retraction of the story. I grew up in a place that was uninhabitable without air conditioning. My school closed once because the air conditioner broke.
Yeah.
We could not sit in the stifling concrete block, airless.
Not acceptable.
Yes, not acceptable.
It's not a slight comfort difference.
No.
And so this is a lengthy piece from somebody named Stan Cox, who lives in Salina, Kansas. and is the author of Losing Our Cool, Uncomfortable Truths About Our Air-Conditioned World, in which, and this is something, by the way, that country people always did say, which is the air conditioning actually makes you feel hotter.
Right, you get acclimated.
You gotta get used to
the
the
humidity,
heat.
Chris. It's the humidity.
It's the humidity, and I am definitely not acclimated. And taking it with the lightest, taking a Joy Czar's approach to this piece, I would say there is truth in it, and people do get over air conditioned. And when the weather gets nice, you ought to have your windows open. And I say this as a person who runs my air conditioning my air conditioner will run into October, certainly, and will come back on in March for sure. But so there is truth here. But the idea that for lots of Americans that doing away with air conditioning and letting the prairie breezes blow in, I call it facile. Also facile. The marshmallow test and other predictors of success have bias built in, researchers say, the Washington Post. So everybody knows, the famous marshmallow test, which is a great, and the story is you put a child in a room and you say, you can eat this marshmallow now, or if you wait, you get two marshmallows.
By the way, most of those children were the children of Stanford academics, so there probably was a little bit of different, not a random sample of children.
100%. Carolyn Johnson, writing at the Washington Post, begins, in a rural village on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, cultural developmental psychologist Suzanne Gaskins placed pillowy marshmallows in front of a half dozen Yucatec Maya children and gave them a simple choice: eat the treat now or wait and get two. For decades, the eponymous marshmallow test has taken on almost mythic meaning. The test, originally developed to measure children's ability to delay gratification by tempting them with fluffy, gooey sweet, was later shown to be a potent predictor of success in school and beyond. Gaskins, a professor emerita at Northeastern Illinois University, has studied independent, autonomous, and capable children from this indigenous community for nearly 50 years. She predicted they would hold out, sitting in their seats waiting for the second treat when she left the room. Instead, two children ate the marshmallows, 4 walked out of the room.
I kind of respect the ones who walked out. I don't know why they walked out, but they didn't trust whatever she'd put in front of them.
They didn't trust what she put in front of them. They didn't care about marshmallows.
Yes.
I don't want 2 marshmallows.
The kids who instantly ate it, I'm from a family, I was the middle of 3 girls, and my sisters didn't have the same appetite that I did, and I was always hungry, and so I would actually be the kid who would take as much food as possible.
Eat like a convict, right, with the one arm.
Right. This is mine.
I had a brother who was not above licking his finger and wiping it on the preferred pork chop, right? That looks like a good one.
Strategy.
There you
so
go.
maybe they were just hungry, they actually, or they're used to competing for food when it's, especially a special kind of food they don't usually get.
Or also, marshmallows are mid. Marshmallows are not great. A melted marshmallow,
that's good.
Wonderful. Marshmallow fluff. When was the last time you made Rice Krispie squares?
Actually, it's our road trip food in my family. So about once a year we make.
Does anything smell as good?
It's so good.
As freshly, your fingers are sticky.
Yeah,
we just made some. I didn't eat any because I'm trying to be less fat. And they smell amazing. So there's a place for marshmallows.
Yes.
But eating a dry marshmallow, I don't care. So here's what I think is facile about this piece. What's facile about this piece is not that the indigenous peoples of the Yucatan Peninsula have different feelings about marshmallows.
Right.
I'm sure they do. And I'm sure different culture, I'm sure that what they're saying is true, that this test was revelatory about Americans.
Yes.
It was revelatory not just about Americans, but about middle class and educated Americans, and
also revelatory about the experimenter in the gods must be crazy type way.
Yes.
It's like she's like, I'm doing this important test to show.
That's what's facile.
Motivated, yes.
That's what's facile. Yeah. The facileness here is this test is so important. I believe they call it mythic, or took on an almost mythic meaning. No, it didn't. No, it absolutely did not. The marshmallow test is a story that we tell each other about the connection between. It's a story that speaks to a virtue.
Right.
And what is the virtue? delayed gratification.
Exactly.
You have sons
Mm-hmm.
who are 18,
Mm-hmm.
and you have worked very hard in these 18 years to teach them about delayed gratification.
Yes, we had a naughty step. They would
Yeah.
sit on a naughty step when
Yes.
when they misbehaved and
Right.
had to wait.
And good things come to those who wait.
Yes,
And that you'll have to do the hard thing now so that you can have the good thing later.
exactly.
And you've just released them into the wild at college.
Yes. I'm sorry, undergrads of the world. Yes.
And your hope is that they've learned the benefits of delayed gratification and
Yes.
that their inborn character helps them do that.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not the marshmallow test works with the indigenous peoples of the Yucatan Peninsula, it doesn't matter as far as it relates to this stuff. So the facileness here is not that, oh my gosh, there are cultural differences about marshmallow test. It is, what do you think the marshmallow test is? Anyway, harumph. Colin is sighing. That means that we have to go faster.
Okay.
Oh, and just a quick note on this one.
Hmm.
These are the asteroids that scare scientists. Are we prepared for them? The Washington Post, and I saw this piece and I thought, well, what a trashy piece of clickbait. And then
you clicked on it.
And then I clicked on it.
Of course.
For this purpose. I would not have clicked on it. It was not
for work.
Insane Wretches.
It was
for
for
work.
work.
It was for work, doing some research. And it was from the editorial board at the Washington Post
My goodness.
with a clickbait headline. These are the asteroids that scare scientists. Are we prepared for them? Probably not, guys. We're probably not prepared for a civilization-ending asteroid that will destroy.
This seems like a Jeff Bezos idea. Like
Yeah,
he popped
for
by
sure.
the editorial meeting and suggested they write this up.
For sure. The good news is that researchers don't know of any asteroid on course to collide with Earth within the next 100 years that has the capacity to cause serious damage. The bad news, it doesn't mean none exist. Thanks, Washington
They're out
Post.
there.
They're out
They're
there.
out there.
We don't know. Just because we haven't found them doesn't mean that there isn't one that's going to come kill us
Asteroids are
off.
real.
And have you worried about it today? Have you thought about today whether or not the asteroid is going to kill us all? Mwah. Okay, now it is time for our Obsessions of the Week. When we talk about the stories that we can't get out of our heads, and you, our guests, get to go first.
Thank you. I actually picked a story that came out late last night on the Free Press by Sohrab Ahmari called Pseudo Scholars and the Rise of the Barbarian Right. It's a good clickbait title. Good SEO on that title.
I love it.
But it tackles a controversy that a lot of people have been following the last few days of a guy who claims to be a historian, and I rarely get to do this, but I get to say as a historian because I was trained as one.
Get it.
And would
Up
you
here.
like
Up
fries
here.
with that, which is the other skill I have. A guy who claims to be a historian who went to Tucker Carlson's show and said, Winston Churchill is the real villain of World War II.
Yeah, he's a
he's-
super actually.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Just asking questions kind of
Yes.
historian. And then also spun all these crazy, this guy's an anti-Semite. He's problematic in many ways, and Tucker just gave him a big platform.
What did he call him? The greatest, the best, probably the best,
And
most honest.
honest, right?
Yes.
It's always, they're so honest.
They're
I'm
so
like,
honest. It's real. It's
So,
raw.
I'm not even, the guy is just not worth spending too much time on. However, what Sohrab did, which I think was helpful, was to sort of take that as an example of something that's been chugging along on the pseudo-intellectual right, which is trying to reassess obviously bad ideas. Things like, eugenics, race and IQ debates that depart well from statistical, broad statistical analyses and instead say, white good, black bad. I mean, these guys are not subtle. They don't know what they're talking about, but there's a whole kind of way of pseudo-intellectual is really the only
Yes.
way to describe it, that's become very compelling, and they use media, particularly YouTube, to promulgate these ideas. And I think a lot of people, particularly a lot of kids who grew up not really having a great sense of narrative history, either world history or American history, they find it compelling because, especially if it hits younger folks coming out of high school or college who are like, yeah, I like that contrarian perspective because, I'm skeptical. I'm a
Right.
skeptical person. I want to hear all.
It's iconoclasty as history.
Exactly.
Yes.
And they pitch it that way directly, but everything out of their mouths is not just a lie, but often a harmful sort of thing
And
to
it's
say.
it's interesting that you picked because I was wondering how we were going to get into talking about this. Because on the one hand,
Diving right in.
well,
Deep
no.
end.
What's interesting about the way you've come at it. we could do, if we wanted to, every week an episode on, did you hear what so-and-so said? We could talk about Tucker Carlson every week if we wanted to, because that's what he's trying to do, right? It's contrarian, iconoclastic, and most of all, trolly, right? And the success is when people like me who don't pay attention say, what did you say?
Right.
What did you say? The Russian grocery store video or whatever. What did you say?
Right.
So so I don't like to engage, but there's something here going on. And what's fascinating to me is that the piece that you shared is by Sohrab Ahmari.
Right. Who himself is a sort of, not an apostate, but a rebel on the right.
Yes,
in a way.
he's certainly there's some iconoclasty in him. And he is a sacred cow slaughterer who has tried to confront the traditional conservative movement with itself. And he is, I guess it wouldn't be pejorative to call him a nationalist, right?
Right.
And he is calling out these people who are, I'm sure from his point of view, ruining what he's trying to do.
Right.
Right. That if you're Sohrab Ahmari, or your what's his name at Harvard, Adrian Vermeil, or any of these people, when the guy who's like, actually,
the YouTube crank is not your friend.
Yeah, actually,
universe.
People say a lot of things about Hitler. You're like, no. We have to stay as far away from that stuff as we possibly can. So it's an interesting point of entry.
Yeah, it's worth reading. He does kind of give a taxonomy of some of these folks on the right that if you're unfamiliar with them will be useful. If you're familiar with them, I mean, he pulls a few punches, but it's worth saying, look, this is separate from what a lot of people on the right are actually trying to discuss and argue. Like goes back to your earlier point. Like part of the job of writers is to police our own side.
Yes.
And I think he does that well here. I mean, it's an interesting piece.
And one point that he makes that's really good is the forbiddenness, the appeal of the forbidden.
Exactly.
Well, we're not allowed to talk. Well, you're allowed to talk about whatever you want.
Right.
YouTube is a sewer. You can find whatever you want is out there, and you can find it.
Right.
But the forbidden, the secret knowledge angle is they get a lot out of that.
Yes.
And just like the people criticizing National Review, just like the people who criticize it's not a conspiracy against you.
Right.
It's just that you're
wrong.
Yeah, and these are questions that have been explored.
Yes.
When Pat Buchanan wrote a book and said, like, whose fault is the Holocaust? Was it and you're like, Pat,
we know whose fault it is.
We've done the work. We've put in the work. And the point of I am a historian in some sense. I mean, I've written 2 history books. I don't think of myself as a historian. I think of myself as a journalist. But the job of a historian is to impart a message from the past. I come to you, I bring you a message from the past that you might find useful. And it's not useful and in no way conservative to address settled things and say, what if the Russians are right? And you're like, they're not. That's why we wrote it down. That's why we have 10 commandments. That's why we have a constitution. We, after painful experience and long argument, we write a few things down.
Well, and I would add the deflection technique that's also popular among this crowd is to say either, oh, I was just joking and you didn't get the joke, if they're on social media, or to say, oh, we're just doing counterfactual explorations.
Oh.
And in either of those cases, both of those things are a lie.
My absolute favorite, which is I call it the pumpkin spice latte phenomenon.
Oh, this is going to be painful.
Starbucks does not care whether you enjoy their pumpkin spice latte, ironically or sincerely.
That's right.
If you want to say it's ironic, buy it.
They still took your $8. I don't
still
know how much these things cost.
They still took your $8. And a lot of people in media do the same thing, which is, oh, JKLOL. If you think it's bad, if I accidentally had a anti-Semite on my show, I mean, just doing it for the lols. But if you think it's good,
Right.
let's talk more.
Right.
Let's-
Please, my
let's
comment
go
section
deeper.
is open
yes,
to
my
you.
comment
That's the
section is
Candace
open. Let's go.
Owens,
Yeah, let's go deeper. My brief obsession, and my obsession has just basically turned into my long-running obsession with Kevin Williamson. And his piece at the Dispatch, a non-binary choice. And I include it and talk about it. I think everybody ought to read it and just think about it this way. It's something I say every week, and it's an obsession of mine. If you're listening to this, and we talked about it before, if you're listening to this, you're probably not a persuadable voter. You're not. It's not a toss-up for you. Vote how you want to vote. Write in who you want to write in. Do what you want to do. You will not affect the outcome of this election. It will not matter what you do.
Earlier you were telling your listeners how much they do matter, and now you're saying
Well, you
don't
said
matter.
that. I was
It
going
makes
along
no
with
sense.
it. I was going along to be
I
nice.
think they matter. No,
I think they matter as children of God. As I think they matter as people who I want to be in fellowship with. But I don't think that it matters whether you vote for. No, it does matter. But I think you're free to vote how you want to vote. You are not obliged to vote for Kamala Harris. You're not obliged to vote for Donald Trump. You're not obliged to not vote for either of them. Do what you want to do. And at the margins, I was doing math today. A friend of mine and I were going back and forth about how many votes made the difference in these states. So I was spending, in a very Nate Morian way, I spent a lot of time in the dawn and pre-dawn hour of today looking at these numbers from these states. I mean, it's not that it wouldn't make a difference. It's that in North Carolina, the number of people who voted for president but didn't vote for Senate was like 50,000 people more than the number of people who the mythic voter out there for elites is like them. And there just aren't very many of us, right? There aren't very many of us in the world. And the number of people who come in to only vote for quadrennials is going to overwhelm the number of people who are, I'm writing in Barry Goldwater. Right. I'm voting for Tom Tillis for Senate. I'm undervoting on the presidential. It's 9 people, right? And it's going to get overwhelmed by the people who say, I don't even know who my senator is. Right. But it's a presidential election and I'm going to vote. Right. I'm going to vote because it's a presidential election. I've heard a lot about it and they've spent $10 billion. So I'm going to go vote. Those people will overwhelm you. So vote how you want to vote and trust that the good Lord has a plan for this great republic of ours, and vote your conscience and do what you think you ought to do. Harumph. It gets real harumphy, which of course brings us to my favorite time of the week. When I make Eliana say something nice, but I don't have to make you because you're despite your anti-joy posture.
Down with joy.
You are a cheerful soul, but I will lead by example and say that the New York Times, my favorites are ones where my expectations are defeated, and when the New York Times moved a story that was the best books about politics, parentheses, according to you, I said, it will be a disaster. This will be a disaster. This will be a disaster. Handmaiden's Tale followed by, I said, oh, this is going to be a disaster. And you know what? They delivered. They got the first one right, All the King's Men, which is my favorite book of fiction about politics. And then they got one that many people miss, The Last Hurrah, which was also the subject of the great Spencer Tracy movie about the end of machine politics in Boston. And they have The Making of the President in 1960 and the magnificent Robert Caro biography of one of the great villains in American history, Robert Moses. And they have some other stuff in there like The Hunger Games. Okay, we got it. We see you over there. You read children's literature. You're great. I'm not mad at you. I hope you're happy with it. But let's not say that it's one of the greatest books about politics, okay? But it has a bunch of good stuff in there. and I was actually really impressed. They got it right. Good list.
Yeah. Well, my favorite was a column in the Wall Street Journal opinion section by Dan Henninger from August 28th called "The Soap Bubble of Kamala Harris's Campaign." Not the greatest title, actually, because the column has a lot in there. But one of the things he starts out with, and I think he's correct, is just talk about how credulous we all are, actually, because we tend to see something online, get upset about it, and then instantly react. And we're sort of training ourselves in habits of mind to do that. But he gives credit to the Harris campaign for understanding that impulse, how it plays out, and for dialing right into it during the convention. But then he pivots and says, this is an opportunity, if you don't like what Harris is selling, to stop it. The challenge will be for the candidate on the right, Donald Trump, to actually be, and this is where the soap bubble, to be that hard surface that the beautiful soap bubble of joy pops against because, the laws of physics. I don't do math. So I liked the column because he's trying to get at something a little broader, but he doesn't have the space. And he's a very good columnist. He's a very disciplined columnist who keeps it shoots straight every time.
He's a craftsman, right?
He is. I think he's an underappreciated person on that page. I think he doesn't get the love he deserves. But I really enjoyed that column. I was thinking about it later. Often you read an opinion column, you're like, oh yeah, okay, thanks, Peggy Noonan, that was smart.
Yeah.
And then I forgot it 2 days later. She's great, but like this one stuck with me for some reason. I think both because it captured something that the Harris campaign is doing right that maybe people on the right underestimate. Particularly its appeal to younger people. Whether they vote, that's a separate question. But I think it also raises a challenge for the Trump campaign and how they're going to confront this, because he can't treat her like Hillary. He can't treat her like Biden. And he's struggling to define her his way. And I just thought it captured a lot about our current political moment.
Do you know why Henninger is so good?
Why?
Because he's from Cleveland.
There you go.
See, he's got that CLA. He's got that gritty Midwest newspaper man
river
sensibility.
Sometimes catches on fire. We're my family's from my relatives are from
my brother
Cleveland.
was born in Cleveland. My family lived in Cleveland
we were
twice.
from Lorraine, so we were like,
Oh yeah, I mean,
more downscale. But
yeah, that's the seeing Rocky River. I mean, that's it gets tough out there. But that good Midwestern newspaper man sensibility, we appreciate it. And we appreciate you, Christine Rosen.
Thank you for having me on.
So generous, and I really love working with you, and I'm so glad that you're here. I wish you great success with your book launch, and I would encourage everyone to buy. I said 3. I think it's really 5.
Let's go for 5.
The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World. It will be. I can't wait to read it, and I bet it's going to be wonderful, and I wish you every success.
Thank you.
Heck yeah. And you people who Christine values and treasures. That's the news about the news. That's all the time we have. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcast.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcast.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by none other than Colin Chicola. Call him Cookie. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.